What we need is entrepreneurs. It's really that simple. We have some of the biggest companies in the world.
I see that actually a lot in Miami founders.
The moment you get someone's actual attention, and if you don't have what they're looking for, they're not coming back. It's so hard to start a business.
And then when they build, the investors will come.
You really have to build something solid before you try to publicize it and attract people to it.
Are there any mental models you've used to make hard decisions?
Don't be reactive. You've really just wasted your shot.
Today, we are here at the Playbook with Peter Yared. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
Peter is someone we're really eager to talk to and look at the world through his eyes. He's a 7-time founder, sold companies to like Oracle, some Microsystems, Citrix. You've been a Fortune 500 CEO at CBS and Viacom, deciding where billions of tech spend is going. And you grew up internationally. So I think it was Switzerland, Austria, UK. And so you learned that the world doesn't play by one set of rules, I think, over this history. Peter is now the founder and CEO of InCountry, as we could see here. And we're going to go deep into who's Peter, what's going on in his mind, how he sees the world. And we're going to talk a little bit also about Miami, because this is Playbook Miami. Peter, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Great intro. I was the CTO.
CTO.
Of CBS Interactive, not the CEO.
So CTO is thank you for that. That was hallucination on the AI side. But
it was Les Moonves, if you remember, was the CEO.
That guy is very important. We like him. Yes. So thank you so much for coming. Why don't we just kick it off? Why don't we start a little bit who you are, what you're up to, a little bit about your background. I did a quick intro, but tell us about your story in a quick nutshell.
Well, I mean, in a nutshell, I did grow up internationally. My mom's from America, which is why I don't have an accent. And my dad worked for the UN. And we were like in Vienna, which is a big UN center. And I was at international school, and they got an Apple II when I was in 5th grade. And I just fell in love with programming from like age 10 onwards. And, and I don't know, I'm old enough that I've been sort of part of almost every phase of computing, going back to PCs and client server and the first days of the internet and open source and mobile and social, and now AI. So, I feel really fortunate to have been through all of that. And I moved to San Francisco in 97, and was there for 23 years. I was part of like that whole ecosystem. From before it was cool. No one who was programming computers in the early 90s was considered cool,
Okay, amazing. And so you were 10 years old, you started to code.
Yeah.
And so you were coding from Vienna. Is that where you were coding? And you were learning to code there. Do you think 10-year-olds just code now? Is there a need to code anymore? We were just talking about cursor and vibe coding. Can't you just prompt and say, I'm a composite of the best developers at Google and Meta and this, and produce me code? Or where do you think 10-year-olds should be coding today?
If you go back to like 1980, 1981 and 1982 and what coding was like back then, there was you and there was the machine and not much in between, right? So the real question is anybody today really coding? Because every few years you are another abstraction layer away from the hardware, right? And so basically nobody today really knows how to code in assembly or C or even C++. They've all moved on to these abstractions and JavaScript, TypeScript, Rust or whatever, but they're pretty far away from the machines. And so I really look at, what people call vibe coding. It's really sort of the next iteration of, you're not telling the machine exactly what to do. Right. And now you can be more and more descriptive about what it should do. So yeah, I think it's very natural and everyone should sit there and play with it. Why not? It teaches you to think logically.
Yeah, we need more logic. That's for sure. I think that applies not only to developers, but business leaders, politicians.
Yeah,
you name it. Rationale and logical reasoning at the early stages is mucho necesito. So when you were in San Francisco and you were working as a CTO and then you started InCountry,
yep.
What was the light bulb moment to go build InCountry after having some big enterprise experience?
Yeah, because I'd done a bunch of startups before, and they all got acquired. And actually, the way I ended up at CBS was I built a social marketing startup one of the first ones called Transpond, and CBS was our biggest customer.
Oh, wow.
And I knew all of their internal systems and what have you. And a new guy, Jim Lanzone, had taken it over. He runs Yahoo now, actually. And so he had taken it over. And the former head of entertainment there referred me saying, look, everything here needs to be redone. And had just sold Transpond to Web Trends, and then Web Trends sold it onwards to Oracle, you know? And I was just like, I had this crazy idea to build a next generation CMS. And that actually had a lot of AI powered stuff, would be social native, mobile native. And I'd been toying with the idea. And then I realized the only people that could possibly need this are very, very low. There's like 6 customers for this. And then lo and behold, CBS calls me and they're like, would you like to come here and redo all of our tech stack? And because they were running a ton of old proprietary stuff, they'd acquired CNET.
Wow.
And, and CNET had a bunch of old, like they ran their own ad server, data warehouse, a lot of crazy stuff. So I was like, yeah. So I went to CBS, moved a bunch of the legacy stuff to vendors, and then we built a next generation. CMS is a content management system from scratch, but it was fun. I mean, we did stuff like stream the Super Bowl, and it was like a good experience. And I learned a lot about how everything I'd been selling to enterprises at that point. I'm trying to think, coming on 25 years, 2020, and on the buyer. Once I was in the buyer seat, I realized I knew absolutely nothing about how people bought software.
So share more about that, because I think that's super interesting, is navigating enterprise procurement. How do you sell to CBS? How do you sell to these massive organizations, especially when they're going to providers and going to different systems? How do you think a founder today, or how would you advise normally to go navigate these huge organizations if you were to sell into a CBS?
Yeah, it's interesting because the vendors that we did buy from, I identified an internal need and sought out the vendor, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
and
the reverse.
It was a sort of a reverse thing. And then we had some vendors that we even tried to bring in to do stuff, and they were just so terrible to work with that we walked away, right?
From a technology perspective or people perspective?
People and contracting perspective.
contracting.
Yeah. I mean, there was one video player, and we wanted to redo our video player, and I brought them in. I told them what to do, how to do the demo. We had a meeting at CES with like the head of entertainment, the head of everything, the head of finance. Everyone's in the same room. They're doing this demo. I was like, the guy loves Hulu. Make it look like Hulu. And they did. And then they were so weaselly in their contracting terms and stuff that finally it was going back and forth. We realized we're never going to get anywhere with these guys. And we actually just stuck with what we had at that point. So there are some lessons learned there. Now that I sell to enterprises, I've realized like one of the best things you can do is piggyback on an existing platform. So for example, at InCountry, we piggyback on Salesforce and we piggyback on ServiceNow. And then someone is making its internal machinations. It's not they hate new vendors. Nobody wants to work with a new vendor at all, right? And the entire system, procurement system and the security system is all oriented towards antibody. Don't bring in a new vendor, use an existing vendor. But, when you go to you have somebody who's like, let's say the director of Salesforce, and then compliance comes and says, you have this issue. Then he goes, oh, okay. He or she's like, oh, I found this Salesforce plugin, App Exchange plugin that solves the problem. So when you're selling a plugin to an existing platform, it makes the sale a lot easier. And we have some of like the biggest companies in the world using our software, and we're just a little startup. And, our first customer was a stock exchange, and a second customer was like a huge pharma that you would have heard of, right?
I love it. So tell us a little bit more about InCountry. I have a lot to say about piggybacking, but maybe just give us some context on InCountry, what you're doing, a little bit about Agent Cloak, maybe the journey of the business so far.
Yeah, well, look, we started the company in 2019, and I actually had the idea in 2018, 2017, and was toying around with it. We had a little prototype built, and the thesis of the company was around deglobalization, which back then all my friends said stupidest thing I've ever heard of, right? But I'd grown up internationally, at my last company, Safa, we had a huge office in Prague, and I was like, my thought was this idea that every country's data would be sitting in the United States, wasn't realistic. And increasingly people were going to insist that they have their data in their country. And it's not like, the big hyperscalers didn't see that, because if you see, they've built a ton of regions.
Totally.
So actually, if you're in a country and you want to run your stuff mainly in your country, you can find stuff that only runs on those hyperscalers, for example, or, you can find vendors that have moved to those. what we're solving for is multinationals. You don't want to run 8 different sales forces.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and the funny part about it is, like my entire IT career has been put all the data in one place. You got all the leads in Salesforce and all the tickets in ServiceNow and all the data in the data warehouse. And so there's teams that do nothing but that, right? Oh, you're running a separate CRM. We acquired your company. Now we're going to migrate you to our global Salesforce instance. But here's the thing: you do that so you get a global pipeline report on your or your customer service system. The open close rates by region, things like that. But right now, you're copying data globally. So there's one team migrating all the data into one place, and then there's another team making it compliant.
Right.
And increasingly, the compliance cost is very, very high. It started with GDPR. Then you have, Pitbull in China. You have rules in Saudi Arabia. And these are lucrative markets, right, for multinationals selling stuff, right? And even, Brazil, India, everybody has their own rules. But here's the thing. If you're running a sales organization and it's a global sales organization, sure, you want to know that there's a deal in Turkey. There's a great $1 million opportunity in Istanbul. It shows up in your pipeline report. Do you really need the name and phone number and email of the contact at the buyer sitting in Istanbul? Because you're paying money to send that to the US, and the only people using it is the local sales team. And there's a million cases like that, and you have to pay money to have this data sit in the US that you don't use and you don't need there. So that's the problem we solve. We let you run a global system and then isolate the personal data in each country. And then what we've been working on for over a year and a half, and we just launched, is an AI version of this called Agent Cloak. So if you have an AI agent that's a client talking to an AI agent server, we can sit in between and we maintain a secure digital twin, and we mask the data going back and forth, but actually in a very creative way. We can turn an age into an age range, for example.
I love that. And so what was the spark for that? Is your demand from customers? Was that a natural evolution of InCountry to go into this AI world, given that you started in 2019, or you were thinking about AI for a while? So this is not let's follow this trend. It was, let's be really thoughtful about enterprise data.
Exactly. So AI, ChatGPT was sort of a boom. I mean, like my last company, we did machine learning. So it's not like I wasn't aware of this stuff, but it was like, wow, this is finally going to happen. And so we were like thinking for a few months, what can we do? We focused on cross-border AI agents. And then EU AI Act passed with data minimization. So we also expanded it to, in a country, you should send your request of an AI the absolute minimum of data it needs in a zero trust environment. So you don't want to send it everything. You want to be like, oh, you don't really need to know an exact address for what you're doing. I can turn that into a country or a state. And right now, people are flinging all the data to every AI server, MCP server, and they haven't really implemented traditional security, which is zero trust. You trust it only with what it needs. So we're sort of seeing opportunities for this both cross-border. A lot of our customers are rolling out customer service agents, for example, only in the US. They know they can't take it global.
Right.
And then we're also seeing it within markets in terms of AI data minimization.
Right. And so today, how many countries are you operating in? If you were to go to a big Fortune 500, they'd say 80 countries, 75 countries you can work in, or does it work like that?
Well, we have available. We've done it in 90.
90.
But a lot of customers are running even on premises. We have a partnership with Amazon Outposts, which is very useful for Africa. We just went live in Uzbekistan.
Wow, nice. Actually, I really want to go to Uzbekistan.
So
I want to see the Silk Road.
It looks amazing.
For sure. I love it. Yeah, I think, you said earlier about piggybacking on some of the larger providers.
Yeah.
I think like channel sales is so important in that sense, when you can go have someone that's already sold a larger system into a customer, an enterprise that you want, and they're bringing you into the deal, or they're referencing you versus going from scratch. And so what are your tips on go-to-market? This is 0 to 1 phase to founders. We have a lot of future founders, current founders, investors watching. In this phase where everything is AI hype, everyone's talking about this, enterprises are probably more focused than ever on zero trust and security and making sure it's the right people they're partnering with. Walk us through like the 0-1. How do you advise enterprise AI companies in that motion?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a very well-known AI security company. And actually, I know the founders. I worked with them in the 90s, and they're funded by like the top VCs. They've been in market for 2 years. They look like they're absolutely amazing. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, they proudly announced they had a SOC 2
Mm.
compliance, which basically they announced we have not had a single enterprise customer in deployment yet.
Right.
And maybe they were working in the labs or whatever. So I think, there's a couple approaches on this. Sort of the traditional San Francisco approach is start small, iterate, sell to other startups, then maybe try to get to mid-market and then try to get to enterprise. You know, and what we're seeing, because it's such rapid iteration right now, is those are running into some challenges that to start small, very easy to replicate.
Yeah.
So then you're just playing an execution game and you're not really building any moat. And then, yeah, so I don't know. And then, and also if you're doing something that's relatively easy, the frontier AI companies replicate what you've done, right? And we were talking about text to video. The first one was called Pika.
Right.
Remember them? They
Yeah.
had like the Pikachu, and it was like an amazing video, blew everyone's mind. Some VC plunked $50 million into it, and you never heard about it again,
Right.
right? And so you have to be careful. One, you're not doing something that is replicable. And somebody just posted like a few days ago that they replicated Harvey.
Yeah, I saw that. It was a lawyer who's also like an AI engineer, I guess. And he made a long post that he replicated Harvey, Lagora,
Yeah.
and maybe another one that's out there. And it was a huge LinkedIn comment section about
Yeah.
actually what it is. So it is interesting about these labs and the frontier models. Like, why can't they go horizontal? What is vertical AI anymore? Can't they do it all?
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. You have to have a proprietary process, proprietary data, some real know-how, or you have to do something that sits outside of the models or between the models. We're focused outside models, between models. Before something hits a model, we isolate data.
So you've raised a little bit of money.
Mhm.
How big is the team today, and how are you thinking about the next couple of years? Everyone is talking about AI. It's at Art Basel AI, Davos AI, this AI, this AI. So walk us through 2026, 2027 for InCountry. Where do you think we're going?
Where we're going, it's really interesting. Where we're seeing the most traction right now is customer service systems, where people want to automate the responses, and both text, email. In China, it's WeChat, and of course, voice to voice is like, the head of, the head of the pack for this because people call. So it's super fascinating. I think a lot of our interactions are going to get automated. A lot of this is that the backend systems can't do it. Like the only time I call an airline is I can't get it done on the website. I'll give you an example. I plan a trip with my wife. We buy 2 plane tickets. They're on the same PNR, as they call it, the same confirmation code. Then I'm like, now I need to change my ticket, but not hers. There's no airline website on the planet lets you do that. You have to call them, split the PNR, get your PNR. So I think
45 minutes later.
Yeah. So part of this process is, and it's funny, I like to compare Sierra and Salesforce.
Mhm.
And Sierra is Brett Taylor, who left Salesforce. And so he walks into a company, he's like, what are the 10 things people call about? And he wires those all the way through. And it's across systems. Like, what's the status of my order? Well, first you have to validate a customer, look up their order. If it's been shipped, you have to go query FedEx and you go, your order is going to come, that shipped, it's going to come in 2 days or whatever, right? Versus a Salesforce is like, you have to do all the internal stuff and then you can build the one agent, but then it's a great agent because it has all of your data. So it's really well trained. So it's sort of like the convergence of these two things.
It was very interesting if you watch Mark Benioff's Twitter or his X posts, what he's talking about AI and Gemini, just the game that's happening with the big players, the Salesforce, the ServiceNow, these titans. I don't know if I'd bet against Salesforce. I think in 10 years, they're still going to be pretty sizable, maybe even larger than today. I do meet a lot of people that think that there's going to be new CRMs and vertical AI can go after them, Palantir, et cetera. But I'm a bull on Salesforce. I think they have smart people. They have the market, and they have a lot of cash.
Well, the biggest complaint about Salesforce is the user interface sucks,
Right.
and the nicest thing about AI is you have to use the user interface. But, can they still charge what they do per seat? I don't think they can. And I think they know that, and they're moving heavily into data. They just bought Informatica. So they know it's all about having all the data, but also what they have that a lot of people don't have is the vertical knowledge, right?
Right.
And so they have Health Cloud, and then that's vertical, and then they have horizontal cloud. Yeah, they have the vertical cloud and the horizontal Revenue Cloud, Marketing Cloud. So I think for somebody who doesn't want to think about it, just call Salesforce and have everything taken care of. For the DIY guys, they're going to be able to have a lot of fun, I think, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think so too. It's just now the big debate is about gross margins. Do people actually care about gross margins? Should they matter? If you're going for $1 trillion business, you're going to need capital. The CapEx actually put money into the business. Who cares about gross margins? I don't know. InCountry, I imagine, thinks about gross margins.
Yes, we think about how we're going to get to profitability and how much money do we make on each customer. And we were losing money on a couple customers, and we fixed that, right? Once we really looked at our model and understood what we were doing, how do you grow? How do you grow fast? Like, one of our biggest problems actually is we're very good at selling to large enterprise, but we don't have small people using us. And we fixed a lot of that. We integrated with identity servers. So if you're already using like a SIAM for login and management, you can put more fields in that. And then we can isolate it in different countries. We've launched that with Okta, with Auth0, with Escardio, WSO2, and one other one actually, which is they resell it, so it's not announced. So yeah, I think we're very focused now on small, high growth with Agent Cloak, and we think we have a lot to offer with that.
I love it. I love it. So you moved to Miami, just to change the topic a little bit. When did you move to Miami exactly?
We moved here August 2020.
And what was the light bulb moment for you to leave the Bay Area and come over east?
Well, I'd lived there a long time.
You said 25 years?
23 years, yeah. And then even in 2019, my wife and I were like, we want to live in multiple places. So we lived a little bit in Berlin, Singapore. So we were kind of gravitating towards a base in San Francisco, a vacation home in Hawaii, and then part of the year in Berlin and part of the year in Singapore. And that was the plans we put together in 2019. And then the interesting thing about COVID was we were in one place.
Right.
And we're like, we really like being in one place.
Right.
And I crunched a lot of the data early, and I was like, oh, this is going to blow over pretty fast. And then we realized it's not.
Right.
And then we're like, we got to get out of here. And we saw Ron DeSantis talking about Miami and Florida, and we're like, let's go check it out. So we came here in August, we checked it out. We rented a place. We came back, we moved in September. And after a couple of weeks, we're like, we're staying here. And then by December, we're like, we don't even want to go back and forth to SF. We put our house on the market like the following summer.
Amazing.
So yeah, we've been here over 5 years now.
And you said earlier that some of your friends, when you were building InCountry, thought you were kind of crazy for solving this problem. Do your friends in the Bay Area still think you're crazy for Miami?
It's interesting. Some do, some don't. Because it's different, right? So, one of the things about San Francisco in the Bay Area, and even tech in some ways, it's very lemming-like. Everybody moves in the same direction very commonly. So for a while there was like, everyone should work remote. Then it's like, everybody should come back here and hang out together. And, and it's interesting. I do go to SF a lot more than I did, but it's funny. Most of the time I meet with people who are not from the Bay Area.
Right.
We just presented at the Tech Innovation Summit for a huge bank. Everybody in that room was from New York, Charlotte, or Dallas. But that's where people are aggregating right now for AI conferences and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I moved to Miami 3.5 years ago. People still think it's kind of wild that I live here. I just think it's not even a narrative violation anymore. There's so many great people here, and I think the environment really sets itself up for that. So since you've been in Miami, you lead an enterprise tech meetup. You're doing a lot in the community, publishing, writing about the ecosystem. What's your assessment? What's your guttural raw take on where we are? We're filming this November 26th, 2025. So guttural raw take, end of November 25. What is Miami tech?
Well, you have to kind of look at what's happened over the last 5 years. So 5 years ago, although there was tech here, I sold my last company to Citrix, which is based in Fort Lauderdale. And
people don't realize that Citrix is a big company, Fort Lauderdale.
Well, they had 2 big empty buildings in Santa Clara, which I think the private equity people took care of. That took them private.
Real estate's expensive. A lot of venture dollars go to real estate.
For real. So there was tech here, and there was successful tech. When I was with CBS, we had bought Sportsline, which was also in Fort Lauderdale, right down the street from Citrix, and we hosted at Terramark, which was the other direction. And so there has always been some solid tech here, but it was not like a startup capital. And then a bunch of people hung out here during COVID, and then they left. And I think that's all fine because, I look at New York as the guideline for what we can accomplish here. And what's interesting, if you just look at total deals, Miami went from nothing 5 years ago to a peer to like Austin and Seattle.
Right.
So it's not weird to have a company in Austin, and it's not weird to have a company in Seattle. And for the same measure, it's not weird to have a company here now either. And and people are like, oh, you really need, like a solid tech university because San Francisco has Stanford and Berkeley. And yeah, there was some good research that came out of there, but they only have like 2,000 CS grads between them a year. And you look at what happened in New York, they have no good tech university. Cornell is like a 4 or 5 hour drive away.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it's closer to Philly, frankly, than New York City. Or am I doing my, I didn't do my direction right. But anyway, it doesn't matter, so you don't actually need that. So 15 years ago, right, the DoubleClick guy, Kevin, and Bloomberg got together and they said, we got to make this a tech capital. And so they aggressively set up programs and systems and community to make that happen. And now New York is the number 2 tech hub behind the Bay Area.
Yep.
And I mean, I think the last deal count I saw was like 2/3 of the deal count. Now, they don't have like the huge frontier companies, but they have a lot of vertical AI, advertising, media, MongoDB.
Yeah.
And so I think, what we should aspire to, and we're only 5 years into this journey.
Right.
And like, Mayor Suarez and Manny Medina are like the Mike Bloomberg and Kevin Harvey, I think it was, from DoubleClick from 15 years ago in New York City. And they're making slowly set the tone, establish this, like, we want to do it. We want companies like that here. And I think it's like, well, who can we attract? We don't need a tech university, although I know there's machinations to make that happen. What we need is entrepreneurs. It's really that simple. And so I thought about it. I wrote that article for Refresh Miami.
Share the article. Yeah. And what are you going to publish more on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I've written 2 articles now on this, but on this one, I was like, well, what entrepreneurs can we get?
Right.
And you look at New York. Well, they attracted a lot of European entrepreneurs. They have Salonis and UiPath because it's a much better time zone to work with Europe. And my whole team is in Europe as well, in Eastern Europe. So I love being on the East Coast now versus the West Coast. I mean, the West Coast was a disaster for it, frankly. I like to sleep in sometimes, and I could not.
It's very hard to you sold the market when you're waking up 3 hours after.
Exactly. So what entrepreneurs can we get? We should try to attract European entrepreneurs that are started in Europe and now want an HQ in the US. The other ones we should go after is Israeli entrepreneurs. There's a ton of them. A lot of them go to New York City there's a big Jewish community, direct flights to Tel Aviv, decent time zone, and also increasingly inhospitable for them. And we're very hospitable for them. And we need to lean into that, right? And I mean, in my own neighborhood in Miami, there's 3 Israeli restaurants and they're opening a 4th. All within
Motest, Abele,
and
Hasalon, and a 4th one would probably be something Slomi. It's really good, probably falafel.
You know them, right? I mean,
it's a great neighborhood too.
Yeah, and then there's that new one at the One Hotel. There's the one in Ball Harbor. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I haven't even been to the One Hotel one yet, even though it's not far.
I heard it's really good.
But we can walk to 3 of them. Anyway, you kind of get the point. It's a very hospitable environment, and we should get every single one of those entrepreneurs to base here, and then the one, this is very interesting because I think there's been some political evolution here because they did bring me in 5 years ago. What should we do?
Right.
And I go, well, what made Silicon Valley happen was we absolutely pillaged the top tech talent out of Russia, China, and India. That's what we did. And I go, here we have 400 million people or 600 million people. I can't remember the exact count in Caribbean LATAM. And we should go get the top 0.1%. And tell them, come here to Miami and have an official program. We'll help you get an O1 visa. We'll have the LATAM Y Combinator equivalent with people to help you. You can base here. There's a direct flight home. It's great. So I think those are the 3 we should go after. And guess what? If we do that in 10 years, we will be comparable to New York versus Austin and Seattle. Sorry, go ahead.
I totally agree. I mean, I started my really career in like 2014. This is like 11 years ago now at this point. And at that point, people were talking about New York. Like, what is New York? Why would you go to New York?
Yes.
And I was starting my career at that point. And now, obviously, we know New York is a tech powerhouse, capital, VC, seed stage to later growth equity. I would say that to add here in Miami, what we need here is also just more founders that are second-time or third-time founders that have been acquired, done their time, and now are building from here. The talent question, I don't really find to be so much of an issue anymore. I mean, it sounds like you are able to find talent for InCountry you're hiring all over the place. But do you think that in-person talent, having high density of engineers running around Wynwood is necessary, or can you build really a startup here?
Well, we started talking about AI coders. Do you really need that many engineers anymore? And you look at the headcount of some of these startups are much lower than ever before. And it's interesting you say, well, what we really need here is second and third time founders. That's actually who we're getting here. What Miami is attracting now, and that's the article I wrote, which was Miami's becoming the Dubai of the Western Hemisphere,
Totally.
is Miami attracts already successful people.
Right.
And a lot of them from a lot of different industries, including tech. And we just need to keep doing that. And it seems to be keep happening. And we're saying everyone's theorizing we're getting a lot of people from New York, and we should just keep embracing that, leaning into it, attracting more and more of these people. And then when they want to fund a company, start a company, there's other people around. In terms of attracting talent, there have been challenges around it. And it's really interesting when you look over at the financial sector, right? What Ken Griffin at Citadel has proven now is you can get young talent to come here.
I live in Brickell, and the amount of backpacks from Citadel logos, Millennium, all the top quant hedge funds, you see them all over Brickell.
All over the place. And then they're all the way up in Boca, Palm Beach, so at West Palm. So there's a ton of those guys coming. The biggest obstacle I've heard is housing costs and schooling, but the housing costs, frankly, are comparable to New York and Westchester and Connecticut and what have you. And actually you get more if you ask me. And then on the education thing, there's this very interesting development, Alpha School, which is like AI. And there's two of them here in Miami, and, it kind of gets away from, do you really need to go to Horseman or whatever, which frankly, the input output of how your kids turn out from some of these places is not great.
I suppose one thing is you need to go to Ivy League anymore and do this Ivy League education. Is that really going to get you to become a world-class entrepreneur or successful in whatever line of work?
So this big upset we're about to have in education, I think, is really going to go into Miami's favor versus waiting the years it takes to establish a bunch of reputable private schools for these people and blah, blah, blah. You just don't need it.
No, you don't need it. And I think there's like a dynamic of school choice in Florida. I think there's there's this type of grants and you can get for each kid if you come to a charter school or like a parochial school. So I think education is coming. My big thing about what we're trying to do here at Playbook Miami is the next big exit should be in Florida. And I think we're tracking the same kind of founders that are here. And I expect big exits. I mean, I was speaking to an investor at A16Z. And they were saying Miami needs to happen now. You need that $0 to $150 million ARR business now. Like, why are we waiting another 9 years or 8 years for this 15-year story to happen? Well, it takes time. Rome is not built in one day. And I think, the 100 or 50 or so people we have in this WhatsApp channel, the engineers, I'm meeting all sorts of great product people that just don't come out from the woodwork.
I know.
It's amazing. Like, I was at dinner with someone that, Reddit, they're a lead person on Reddit, but they don't go to events. They don't market that they're in technology doing great stuff in AI. They just happen to live here and work here. And I remain a bull. That said, there are some concerns. I think this winter will be the big winter for us. I think in Miami, recruiting against Chicago, Boston, Ottawa, even now New York, we'll see what happens in 6 months, is important. But I like this idea of seed-strapped businesses, or you raise a certain amount of money and you don't need to go raise $350, $400 million. You can have a massive exit without raising that much money. I think the AI economy and AI native actually solves a lot of that. So we'll see. I'm a bull. This playbook is a bull for that.
Yeah.
And we'll see. There's a gubernatorial change coming up soon. So
yeah,
we'll see how the new potential governor in this race shapes it up. With respect to Mayor Suarez, one of the things that I think that maybe we did a little bit too much of is over-indexing on Miami and under-indexing on the state of Florida. And the state of Florida controls some of the real power versus the local municipal governments.
And Miami did, yeah.
And Miami did, and so we did a little bit of that. But I personally anecdotally feel like the flow of new talent, new people, all sorts of ages, all sorts of background is still coming. And if you just drive when we leave this podcast and you look at the space to build here, there's no space constraints necessarily. So there's still tons of building and inventory that can be built. So bull, but I think it will take till 2030.
But where Miami's already won,
right?
This is the place already successful people come. It just is, hands down, from every entertainment and technology, real estate, I don't know, vitamin water, whatever. This is where already
Right? Because just because maybe you're a billionaire, you need to hang out with people that are like-minded and have similar values. You're not going to go to a place where there aren't other similar successful people, probably. And so,
at least 6 months a year. And, look, people actually don't move. People say you move for taxes, and there are a few that do. They're very aggressive. But, I paid taxes for 23 years.
right,
First you're like, okay, I want to move.
right.
Then you're like, okay, where am I going to move to? And of course, things like weather and taxes do come into play, right? But, people first have to decide they're going to move, and then they don't move. No one moves their entire life just for taxes, except there are a handful of very aggressive people. They know they have an exit coming, and they move. They get their exit. Then they move back. And you know what? All I have to say for the tax authorities in those states, it's a very simple SQL query to find these people.
So just to close on Miami, so just do you think a young 22-year-old founder should come to Miami, or is it a certain age bracket that should come here?
Founder of what?
A founder of an AI native company building in vertical AI. Do you
If
think
I was doing vertical AI in real estate, sports, entertainment, yeah, I'd 100% camp out here and work directly with the customers, And if I was doing a fintech, I'd probably go to New York. If I was doing commodities trading, I'd probably go to Chicago. So I think we're seeing this initial push that all the AI has to be in SF and the scaling and but I actually think, a lot of it is going to go vertical. And we were talking about Epic Health. I mean, the most hated legacy, you know, healthcare records management system, called up Microsoft. Then they shipped like 4 AI products that nuked probably 50 startups, right? Because they already have the channel. And then Oracle owns Cerner, they're going to do that too. But, you have a guy here, I can't remember the name of it. You bought a place in the Four Seasons.
Daniel Nadler?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Open Evidence.
From Open Evidence, is bypassing these people with like smaller doctor shops, right? And he's here too. There's a lot of healthcare here.
There is a great healthcare cluster. It's kind of obvious there should be a healthcare cluster here.
Yeah.
Just in the past couple of weeks, there's been 2 founders that raised 30 and another really nice round.
Yeah.
Based here and scaling here. Cost of living. You posted an interesting chart yesterday in a group chat that we are on about outlier and Miami being outlier. Maybe just share a little bit about what we were thinking and the outlier.
Yeah.
Where Miami is in that chart and your analysis of that. We'll put it up on the screen when it comes up.
Yeah. Well, look, when I moved here, property was really relatively inexpensive, and now all those prices have doubled or tripled. And so that's kind of crazy. But, it's interesting, what also doubled and tripled is rent. And now that's starting to drop.
It is. I've negotiated down.
Yes. So, and because there's a ton of supply, we're sitting here in Wynwood, there's a ton of supply. And the same thing happened in Austin. So in Austin, because of the supply, the pricing of rentals is back to pre-pandemic levels. And that's not even inflation adjusted, So I think we're going to start to see a bit of the same thing here. As newer buildings go up, the older buildings cost less. It's like pretty rational. And, even in terms of single family homes, there's a distribution. More and more people are going to Broward, which I call sort of like, the San Jose of our San Francisco, and so it's actually a pretty big metro area, and you're starting to see a pretty big distribution where there are affordable homes, but not on Miami Beach.
Right. Not on Miami Beach, not in Coconut Grove, not in Coral Gables, but that's not. There's any neighborhoods.
There's Pinecrest right there.
1,000%. It was interesting to see that outlier stat, and we'll definitely put it up. How about the capital market here in South Florida? How do you think VCs are operating here? We know a lot of the same VCs. We work with a lot of the same ones. They're great. We have Midas-less VCs here. Is it a good place for a VC, or can you do VC work anywhere?
Well, what's interesting is it's the best place in the country probably for family offices.
Right.
And a lot of them are doing direct placements now.
That's true.
Let's start with that. So there's a lot of capital.
Which may not be a good thing. They might be misguided, but if you know what you're doing, it's good. But there's a lot of family offices that probably should, my perspective, working with fund managers.
I agree. But, I've seen some where they're grouping together and they're actually not unsophisticated. They did I agree with you, a couple of years ago, there's some pretty unsophisticated investments, but they're getting more and more sophisticated. But the point is, there's a lot of capital here. So the limited partners of the VC firms are here. I see a lot of people I knew from San Francisco that are through here. Hey, I'm in town, and they're raising money for their own funds. And there's a set of hardcore VCs that are here But they don't only invest here,
Right.
So, but there's a good set of people here. It's a good nexus.
Yeah, I never really understood geographic-based investing. Like, I'm gonna only focus on this city and invest only in this city. You have to. It's a global country. It's a global market, right? You
Yeah.
have to go everywhere. But obviously, this is a capital, and the amount of LPs, PE executives, VCs just walking on the street, going for lunch. And fortunately, I have become a plug where if you're coming from San Francisco or New York, you need to be LPs. Ping me.
Yeah.
So we're gonna close up. This is the few things I want to go just like a framework. Are there any mental models you've used to make hard decisions? Anything that's come to mind over the years that's worked successfully as you're going through a big deal or a challenge? That's a mental model.
Don't be reactive.
Don't be reactive.
That's really when I was younger, I was always reactive there. And now you just have to like wait a day or two. And the mental model, I mean, there's no single mental model for anything, but the right decision sort of emerges after you calm down a bit, talk with your co-founder, talk with your execs, listen a little bit, and not overreact, which I still do sometimes, like, you know, but yeah, it's like, don't overreact, don't be reactive, not everything needs to be responded to immediately, although it feels like it. And then you usually have a much better outcome when it's more thoughtful.
Yeah, don't be reactive, but take some pause and actually look at it. A specific business decision that you made that might have looked crazy at the time, but turned out really big and was successful?
For this company or a previous,
Yeah,
I mean,
career.
like this company, 18 months ago, we completely reset the way we did operations and saved a ton of money because our cost basis, our expense ratio to revenue ratio was off, like everybody, kind of overhired. So we fixed that. And then, we pivoted into identity and AI. And also we didn't do like the build in public and iterate. We just like dug in, built a solid product, launched a year and a half later, which I thought was 6 months behind, but we're like 6 months ahead of everybody. But that was a tough decision, to sit there. Hey, what we're doing is great. We're closing the biggest companies in the world. We have great customers, but the growth isn't there. So we need high growth products in sort of the emerging market. So we're going to take what we had. We're going to keep getting customers like that. But we're going to lean into high growth.
One of the things you just mentioned, I think, is really wise, and I'm going to see a lot of it. I think we're going to see a lot of it is not building in public. I think there's a lot of build in public, these launch videos that are coming out. But one of the signals, I'm actually curious what you're long for and what you're maybe a founder or a trend that you're long on. But I'm long on not spilling all the beans in the lobby, letting actually execution tell your story versus marketing. Seeing so many flashy videos and posts and articles where it's just like build the product, get customers, show revenue, and that's it. Go stealth.
Yeah.
I'm seeing founders right now delete their LinkedIn's, delete their Twitters, delete their whole social profiles, and they're not Googleable. And they're just scaling and scaling and scaling. They don't want to be found. They want their companies to be found.
Yeah.
What signals are you long on or trends that you're long on?
Look, what I'm tired of is people launching stuff and saying stuff and actually go try to use it and it doesn't do what they say, right?
That's a lot of that.
And what I think people don't understand in is sort of this attention economy. So I think the goal of that is fundraising,
Yeah.
more than get customers, but
Logo hunting.
And there was the lean startup and iterate and ship absolute crap and see who wants it, put up a fake landing page and see. But the issue is things have shifted so much and there's so much AI slop out there now that the moment you get someone's actual attention and they bother to come to your website and they bother to come check out your product or whatever, and if you don't have what they're looking for, they're not coming back for another 12 to 18 months, if ever. So you've really just wasted your shot and you really have to build something solid before you try to publicize and attract people to it.
100% agree. And I think that's a change we'll see in 2026. I see that actually a lot in Miami founders is that the proof is in the pudding, right? They don't want to be marketing slop. They want to actually show that they have real traction, real revenue. And then when they build it, the investors will come.
Yeah. I mean, I sadly, I know several companies now where they just never shipped.
Right.
Haven't shipped.
So
Can't ship.
could you ship once a week, once a month, once a quarter? What are shipping cadences like for development teams? Like, what do you think is appropriate?
No, they haven't shipped their first
their
product.
First anything.
Anything.
Raising more than 10 million.
Or they raised money and they iterate, but they tried to build something that was really hard, had never done it before, or had never even really built a product before, but it's so easy to raise money. and then they can't ship. It's a little nutty, right? And or they can't scale the sale and or they don't even do like QA before they ship. They ship, they get some customers, and then they can't even do QA on the next update. And so there's some really nutty stuff I'm seeing out there. And it's really interesting. I think it might have been Rolafota from Sequoia said, the problem right now is a lot of people are starting companies and getting funded when really they should be working at another company. And so you're getting this vast diffusion of talent. And I mean, I used to have this joke that when I first started, in 95, I started this company, JRAD, which we sold to Net Dynamics, which was then bought by Sun Microsystems. And back then, and my two first VC pitches were Kleiner Perkins and then Weiss Peck and Greer, which became Lightspeed. And of course I got my ass handed to me. But the funny joke I had after that was, people were like, only 150 companies a year get funded by VCs. And then my joke a few years later, like 10 years later, was like only 150 companies should be funded by VCs. And now you have thousands getting funded, right? And in some ways you have this incentive by investors. Let's just fund 1,000 companies, and then we'll double down on the ones that are working, and then we'll triple down on ones that are really working, right? And it's a good kind of, I guess, financial strategy, like with the Y Combinator, 500 startups perspective, or I'm going to go write 100 seed check pre-seeds this next year. But the problem is it diffuses the talent pretty significantly.
For sure. And acqui-hires or being acquired, whatever they want to market as. We'll see what happens there with some of these startups. But yeah, it's definitely really fascinating the way that companies are just scooping up talent. I mean, we had that $1 million offers, $2 million offers for engineers. I used to be a headhunter, and like the 250 to 450 was like a good round. I'd love to be an agent for some of these top talent outs out there right now.
There's not many people who know how to make real AI, right? There's a very, very few of them, and there's a massive talent hunt for them. And then on top of that, next, there's not that many people who know how to use it effectively, right?
Specifically at the enterprise. I mean, I don't know if that MIT report was right about how like 95% of AI pilots at the enterprise aren't actually working.
You dig into that data, it was kind of skewed. But yeah, most enterprises were piloting a bunch of stuff, but they are actually really starting to roll stuff out, and we're talking to huge customers that are starting to roll. But I think next year is the year of the real rollout.
Yeah, it feels that way. And just back to VCs quickly, I think they're overfunding companies. They're funding too many companies, and they're using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or even some of the Chinese versions to do their full diligence. So they're one-shotting due diligence versus actually going and talking to customers and understanding the founder and looking at the market.
Some. But not all.
It's amazing. You look at some LP decks, you're like, yeah, we have this like ChatGPT.
I know.
All right. As we close, 23 years in the Bay Area, I think 5 years here now. If you had a WhatsApp message that you could send to Peter when you were 25, what would you want to send to yourself?
That's really funny. Is I would almost tell myself, it's the craziest thing. Like, if you want to make money, take less risk.
Okay.
Which is ironic, right? Like when I left Sun in 2002, 2003, all my peers were going to Google, and then when I started a social marketing company, I could have just gone to Facebook and I probably would have made more money, but I was just brash and I look back on it and I enjoyed it. So it's like, but you also thought you were making money. So I would say, look, you have to figure out what your goals are. And I love building stuff. So just like, keep building stuff. I would tell myself, keep building stuff. And then, but don't lean over your skis. Like I had a couple companies where I ran out of money and and I had some people that were, not ethical, it's tough, so it's like that risk reward ratio, think it through a little bit. Right. And then the other thing I would tell myself, because I fool myself, it's like these companies are absolutely miserable to do. Right. And you always think I got so much experience. The next one's going to be easy, but they're absolute misery. And so the journey has to be worth it to you to really do them.
You have to be okay with pain.
You have to be okay with pain and people telling you suck and a lot of no's and a lot of sleepless nights. And you have to actually enjoy that process, which very few people do. And I have to say, like, I admire people that open a restaurant or a dry cleaner, especially like you come from another country, you don't even speak the language. All of a sudden you're starting a business. It's so hard to start a business and get people to give you money and get repeat customers.
Start a restaurant, you're in the kitchen. You start a startup,
Yeah.
you're behind email and
Yeah.
an IDE, and you're pushing products.
And management nowadays is very 80s like now.
Okay, say more about that.
I mean, we went through this wave of, oh, let people figure stuff out on their own, and you can't give any direct feedback, and it just created disasters, right? And like when Elon walked into Twitter and fired 70-80% of people, and you couldn't even tell
Right.
that it happened. And everyone is slowly kind of getting to that, oh, well, we'll cut 15% a year, 20% a year, and we'll catch up with that. And you have like the startups today are like, you have to come in on Saturdays, but you do have to know what every single person is doing now and even question it sometimes in your company. And
You're actually a fiduciary if you're venture backed and you're spending pensioners' money and you have employees that are remote that are not working necessarily or burning cash on things that they shouldn't be burning cash, and your ultimate source of capital are pensioners. It's probably wise to understand what
you know,
is doing.
it's funny you say pensioners because I used to have one view of VC. And then one time I went to investors AGM, and I sat at dinner across from an LP who represented a union of cash register employees. And I was like, oh, fuck, this is like people's real money. And it really, you know what I mean? It's not like this abstract billionaire class money. It's like real money from real people. And it changed my view of how you spend investor money.
When I got into VC in 2014, I thought it was just rich people's money, like the GP's money. I didn't realize it was that. And I think founders understanding that will spend venture dollars a lot more effectively. Peter, looking forward to building in Miami with you. Congrats on the growth at InCountry. Looking forward to this again next season, and all the success. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, man.
Here, pleasure.
Appreciate it.